So, good evening, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us this evening for this webinar on Sarnia and Lambton County's electricity future. My name is Allan McKeown, and I'm a co-chair of a local volunteer activist group in Sarnia-Lambton called Climate Action Sarnia-Lambton. And I think I spotted my other co-chair here tonight, Leslie Checkin. So welcome, Leslie. Great you could be here. So joining me this evening are three knowledgeable presenters who will address the issue from three different perspectives. Mike Marcolongo from Environmental Defence, Dr. Mili Roy from Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment, and Angela Bischoff from Ontario Clean Air Alliance. So during the presentations, please post any questions you might have in the Q&A option at the bottom of the screen. The presenters will address the questions after all three have spoken. Each speaker will be given 9 minutes, and I will endeavor to keep everyone on time. For general comments and communication with other attendees, please use the chat function. So now, before I offer an overview of the topic, I will share a land acknowledgement. And being in Sarnia, I will offer the County of Lambton land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that this land on which we are gathered today is part of the ancestral land of the Chippewa, Odawa, and Potawatomi peoples, referred to collectively as the Anishinaabe. It is through the connection of the Anishinaabe with the spirit of the land, water, and air that we recognize their unique cultures, traditions, and values. Together as treaty people, we have a shared responsibility to act with respect for the environment that sustains all life, protecting the future for those generations to come. So with that in mind, we can legitimately ask if Sinclair Township in Lambton County, one of 11 municipalities in the county, is respecting this land acknowledgement by ignoring the option of clean, renewable, and cheaper energy sources. Will Sinclair Township be acting with respect for the environment that sustains all life, protecting the future for those generations to come? And this is not just an environmental issue, it's also a health issue and an economic issue. And it's also an ethical issue. For in the midst of a climate crisis, we need to do what the science points to as the best approach. And we need everyone on board to get where the province needs to be. So as I mentioned, I am co-chair of Climate Action Sarnia-Lambton, which is one of thousands, many thousands of similar activist groups across Canada and the US and around the world. Ordinary citizens who are very concerned about what humans are doing to the planet and its atmosphere, and concerned for the future our children and grandchildren and subsequent generations will inherit. Frustrated by the lack of political will to make meaningful change to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, we also want to hold politicians accountable for the decisions they make. So our group was formed in 2018, and the following year, we were successful in getting Sarnia City Council to declare a climate emergency, and then to develop a climate change action and mitigation plan. We have also been active in community engagement by hosting educational events, rallies, tree plantings, and other activities. And recently we have spoken out against expanding electricity generation fueled by natural gas, maybe better known as fossil gas, in Sinclair Township, while suggesting that they consider renewable energy and utility-grade battery storage, a decision that several other municipalities in Ontario have made. According to the Independent Electricity System Operator, the IESO, which is responsible for overseeing Ontario's power system, the province is entering a period of significant increase in demand for electricity. So the IESO is undertaking a procurement process to acquire additional electrical generation capacity from both new power plants and the expansion of eligible existing ones. If you've been paying attention, you will know that Doug Ford's preference is to focus primarily on nuclear and natural gas or fossil gas, both of which will clearly lead to higher electricity bills for consumers and businesses. It will also hurt the economy by driving away industries looking for affordable and clean energy sources. And in the case of fossil gas, it will take us in the wrong direction in our efforts to reduce carbon emissions. So that takes us to Lambton County, the focus of our webinar tonight, and the 3 proposed gas plants planned for St. Clair Township. So we were frustrated that St. Clair Township Council supported these gas projects without any public input. The public had no say in their decision. So I just have 4 slides I'd like to share tonight. So St. Clair Township, this is the logo of St. Clair Township. You can see the western edge of the township is on the St. Clair River. And, you know, Sarnia and St. Clair Township is heavily industrialized. People tend to think of industry when they think of this area, but along the St. Clair River in St. Clair Township, actually from Sarnia down to the bottom border of St. Clair Township, is a beautiful parkway filled with parks along the St. Clair River. But the mayor of St. Clair Township, Jeff Agar, recently said this: "I personally would love to reside in the gas turbine electrical capital of Ontario, St. Clair Township." So Lambton County is a heavily conservative area, both provincially and federally. And of course, you know, there's lots of refineries, oil refineries and chemical plants in this area. And so perhaps it's not surprising that, you know, they have this mentality that this is the only option, fossil fuels. This is a simple map of Lambton County. There's 11 municipalities. And we also have 3 First Nations. Half an hour, 25, 30 minutes up Lake Huron, we have Kettle and Stony Point. Then we have the Amgenong at the southern edge of Sarnia. And then at the bottom of St. Clair Township, we have Walpole Island First Nation. So St. Clair Township, I have shown with 3 stars here the location of these proposed plants. So we'll start off with the top star, which is just to the east of Corunna, which is a community of about 6,000 people just south of Sarnia down the river. So to the east of Corunna is the St. Clair Energy Centre, owned by Inven Energy. So this is not a brand new plant that is being built. It's getting an additional upgrade with 180 megawatts to add to its existing 584 megawatt output. So that'll bring this plant up to a total of 764 megawatts. So then the second expansion is the lower star here. We'll just skip the middle one for a moment. The lower star is near Courtright. And it is already the largest gas plant in Ontario. It's owned by Eastern Power, and it's on what's known as the Greenfield Power site. So this was originally contracted to produce 1,005 megawatts, and it actually produces 1,038 megawatts. And originally the company had approval to build this plant in Mississauga. However, it became the center of a political scandal at the time, and the project was moved to the gas turbine capital of Ontario, in Clair Township, who welcomed it with open arms. So the two additions on Eastern Power each will be 195 megawatts for a total additional 390 megawatts. And then the star in the middle, which is closer to the St. Clair River, is the proposed brand new gas plant, which is going to be operated, it's going to be built actually on the former Lambton generating coal-fired station. So this is what the Lambton generating station looked like before it was demolished. It's now totally demolished. It's a brownfield site, and it's about 1,200 acres. It's owned by Ontario Power Generation. And this project, which is being built by Atura Power, will take up just 20 to 40 acres of the site. And the capacity of this new plant will be 500 megawatts. And because this is a brand new plant, it'll also need approval from First Nations. And the nearest First Nations will be Walpole Island First Nations. The public still has a chance to comment on this proposal to build this gas plant. The Impact Assessment Agency of Canada is open for public comment on their website. And I'll post the link for that in the chat. And that's going to be available for the public to comment on between, let's see, September 15th up to October the 6th. So there's lots of time to get your 2 cents worth in there. So that's all I have. I'm going to stop screen sharing. And I'm going to invite our next speaker for his presentation. We have Mike Marcolongo, who's representing Environmental Defence. Mike worked for the province of Ontario in 3 different ministries over almost 20 years. He left the Ontario Public Service following Premier Ford's government announcement that it was going to carve up the Greenbelt. Mike started a campaign called Keep the Greenbelt Promise with the Guelph-based Water Watchers. In the last few years, Mike led the founding of Protect Our Moraine in Guelph and the Greenbelt West Coalition in the Grand River watershed. So over to you, Mike.
Great, thank you, Alan. I'm just gonna share my deck here with you. And here we go. Can folks see that? I think so, right?
Yes, we can, yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, so I've titled my presentation Eyes Wide Open, given the context. And let's launch into it. And I'm unable to change the slide. Oh, there we go. So the long-term 2 procurement is the procurement that's taking place as we speak. And it was initially announced by the former Minister of Energy, Todd Smith, as solely for renewables. That changed in June of 2024 when Minister of Energy and Mines, Stephen Leach, took over. And within a week of him taking over the portfolio, he announced that it was being opened to fossil gas. Minister Leach stated that opposition to fossil fuels is ideological, and basically announced that the moving forward, the LT2 procurement, as we call it, would also be technology agnostic. So let's delve into it. Oops, not sure what the QR code is there, but here we go. So is opposition to natural gas ideological? So let's just kind of set the context here. Greenhouse gas emissions are rising in Ontario, and you know, in terms of what's happening, Ontario used to have the cleanest grid in North America. It used to be at 96% a clean grid. At this point, it's we've lost some of those key gains. At this point, the grid is roughly 86% a clean grid, and that's because over the last few years, Ontario has continued to procure under this government additional gas-fired generation. Natural gas or fossil gas is mainly composed of methane. And it's an important distinction here. It's 80 times more potent than carbon dioxide. So it is a massive contributor to climate change. And so what happens is there's often fugitive emissions as part of the process in terms of the pipelines that carry fossil gas as well as it goes to be burned. The methane that the fossil gas that is successfully burned does turn to carbon dioxide, but fugitive emissions is a big issue for the industry. The other consideration is that more than 70% of fossil gas used in Ontario is from the US. And, 2 years ago, that wouldn't have mattered. But with the election of President Trump in the US and the consequent trade war, where we buy our gas and where we buy our key ingredients to power our economy is a big deal. So, for a premier, in terms of Premier Ford, for a premier that speaks to, and positions himself as Captain Canada, this rush towards additional fossil gas to be essentially funded by taxpayers and ratepayers is problematic. The other piece I'd like to highlight here is 90% of fossil gas imported from the US is fracked. And that gas coming into Ontario is mostly coming from the Pennsylvania area. And the fracking process is very detrimental to the environment. Fracking fluids are very toxic, involve hazardous chemicals such as PFAS, which, as we know, are known as forever chemicals. There's also significant amounts of water used in fracking, and it impacts water quality and quantity in a big way. The average frack uses between 5 to 100 million liters of water. So there are significant impacts here in terms of using fossil gas. Let's go back to the procurement. LT2 is part of the largest energy procurement in the history of Ontario. It is significant. It's 7,500 megawatts. It will take place over 4 years as part of 4 separate procurement windows. Unlike the last renewable energy procurement and energy procurement that happened in Ontario, which was under the Feed-in Tariff program or the FIT program, only large energy project submissions are eligible. So only projects over and above 1 megawatt. The key thing here is that distributed energy and distributed generation is a concern. Only big players are playing in this space. Farmers, cooperatives, homeowners aren't able to take advantage of this procurement. Now, for the first window, I just want to highlight 2 key deadlines that are upon us. The first is for energy project submission. So IESO will award 3 terawatt hours for energy generation projects. And for capacity projects, and this is where gas-fired generation plays into that procurement, the deadline there is December 18th. So, the deadline is coming up fast for energy generation. So solar, wind, biomass, other energy generation projects. Whereas with gas, the deadline is December. I'm highlighting this because for 2 reasons. One, we expect to see additional gas developers coming forward between now and December with requesting municipal support resolutions for their projects, and that's typically how we find out about these projects. And 2, I want to highlight that window 1 is being front loaded. So out of the total 1,400 megawatts for capacity projects, which natural gas or fossil gas projects are eligible for if they're above 45 megawatts, 600 megawatts is being allocated for those projects in window one out of that 1,400 megawatt capacity. So we're not sure why that is. Is it political? Who knows? But I also want to remind you, as per Allan's presentation, 500 megawatt Atura plant is being proposed for Sarnia-Lambton. If that project is approved, it would essentially consume the bulk of that 600 megawatt allocation with that one project. So, at Environmental Defense, we've been kind of raising the alarm about how the Ontario government is stacking the deck in favor of fossil gas. And I just want to highlight the previous procurement results. And this is why. Gas is not competitive economically. We saw that in the LT1 results, the long-term one results. So they awarded 410 megawatts of non-storage, so natural gas, and it came in at $1,681 per megawatt per business day. Whereas storage was awarded almost $1,200 in contracts at a weighted price of 672 megawatts per business day. I do want to differentiate here. One is non-storage, the other one is storage, so there's a difference there, but you can see how competitive battery storage is compared to natural gas.
1 minute, Mike.
Sorry, 1 minute? Sure. I also want to highlight IESO, or the Independent Electricity Operator, did miss its target for capacity energy in LT1. Other ways that the government is favoring natural gas or fossil gas. In the fall of 2024, they changed the procurement rules. So in order to get the full points under the capacity criteria, you have to provide a project that provides continuous energy over 12 hours. So that was shifted from 8 hours to 12 hours. No battery storage project is able to meet that threshold. And if you're able to meet the threshold, you get 3 points. If you're unable to meet that threshold, you get 0. And then this past summer, Minister Leahy instructed IESO to change the procurement rules so that you and I, as electricity ratepayers, will be paying for the connections of proposed gas facilities as part of the transmission upgrades. So natural gas developers will be reimbursed at 75%. So my final slide here. There are 2 hot spots in Ontario for natural gas-fired generation proposals, as we heard from Allan, Lambton County and the Sarnia area. The other one is Thunder Bay. Now is the time to push back. We encourage you to contact the president of OPG, Nicole Butcher. The OPG, as Allan was alluding to earlier, is the mothership for Atura. Atura is proposing battery storage facilities in other parts of the province as part of this procurement. Good example is Nanticoke, 300 megawatt battery storage facility. Another one is proposed for Dryden. Why are they picking fossil gas for St. Clair Township? I also encourage you to reach out to Premier Ford and to your local MPP to let them know you do not support costly gas and to phase it out. That's it for me.
Thank you very much, Mike. Very interesting points to cover. We'll move on to our second presenter, Dr. Mili Roy, who is a physician, surgeon, and assistant professor at the University of Toronto. As Ontario co-chair of Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment, and founding co-chair of the Ontario Climate Emergency Campaign, she champions climate action at the intersection of health, energy, and policy. Over to you, Mili.
Thanks, Allan. And I will just try to share my screen here. Okay, can everybody see that okay?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. And thank you to everybody who showed up tonight. I'm going to speak to you about the health impacts of gas plants and sort of tie it back to ourselves, to people on the ground. There we go. Okay, so let's just dig right in. You've already heard about fossil fuels and natural gas being primarily methane, a very toxic or potent fossil fuel. And fossil fuels are the single greatest driver of the climate crisis. In health terms, human health harms and death worldwide in 2020 due to gas were actually comparable to coal, which until then we really felt was the dirtiest fuel on the planet. How does this happen? Burning fossil gas harms human health by two main pathways. One pathway is producing carbon pollution that drives climate change. The other is by producing air pollution, causing particulate matter and toxic gases such as nitrogen oxides. So let's look at the carbon pathway first. And this is climate change, which we now recognize as the single greatest health threat of the 21st century, and that our very survival is at stake. And the science is clear on this. This is a poster from the Canadian Medical Association attempting to show the extent of climate change impacts right across our country. And let's look at that in a little more detail. First, we have extreme heat. As an example, the 2021 BC heat dome, the single greatest or single deadliest weather event in Canadian history with over 600 people dead. Where there's heat, there's fire. So burning gas drives climate change, and climate change is clearly fueling increasingly severe wildfires, as we see now every summer. These fires create multiple health risks of their own and further escalate carbon emissions. And brand new science just published is showing us that the particulate matter from wildfire smoke is far more dangerous than we ever realized before, more so than other sources like traffic, for example, and that the death tolls have been underestimated as a result by 93%. Now, the climate crisis is also harming housing and food security. These are called social determinants of health. Unless we're properly housed and fed, we cannot be healthy. And in the medical community, we are deeply concerned that climate change will aggravate about 60% of all infectious diseases in humans, while also increasing antibiotic resistance, which is a bad combination. And finally, there are devastating mental health impacts of climate change, which especially affect our youth: depression, addiction, suicide, hesitancy to have children. And the majority of youth around the world feel that governments are betraying them and future generations. Now, if we look at the air pollution pathway and how that impacts health, today, over 8 million people are dying prematurely around the world every year by breathing polluted air. This translates to over 15,000 Canadians and nearly 7,000 Ontarians every year. How does this happen? When we breathe in this toxic air, the particulate matter, the nitrogen oxides, they not only pass into our lungs, but they pass right through the lungs into our bloodstream and gain access to our entire body. So, of course, we anticipate lung diseases, things like asthma, chronic obstructive lung disease, but we also see high risks of cardiovascular disease, things like heart attacks and irregular heartbeats, brain diseases like stroke, dementia, ADHD. It is linked to cancer, such as lung, leukemia, and breast. And we're learning more and more about the devastating impacts on pregnant women and unborn babies: low birth weight, premature birth, birth defects, and even stillbirths. And air pollution is an independent risk factor, independent of climate change, for antibiotic resistance and also mental health impacts: anxiety, depression, stress, suicide. And we have very high levels of scientific evidence for this. So what about if the health impacts of a gas plant in particular, if we try to hone it down a little bit? We're especially concerned about nitrogen dioxide, NO2, as a specific pollutant from gas plants. This is linked, again, to lung and heart disease, triggering asthma, chronic obstructive lung disease, which can be fatal, but it also has neurologic impacts, cancers, infection, pregnancy risks. It is linked to increased emergency room visits and hospital admissions, and to premature death. So it takes years off our lives. So what is a safe level of NO2 exposure? The more we learn about the risks, the more we realize we are more susceptible than we ever thought. So really the take-home message is we're not sure what could constitute a safe exposure limit. But we do know from studies that people living near gas plants have clearly increased health risks. Emergency room visits in the elderly, preterm deliveries for pregnant women, restricted activity days, chronic bronchitis, and more. So what is a safe distance to live from a gas plant? Again, we need more research. We don't clearly know. There's a lot of unknowns, but some studies have shown health impacts within a 20-kilometer radius. It's not strictly defined. And I took the liberty of mapping out Sarnia and to show that the majority of Sarnia is within 15 kilometers of the existing St. Clair Energy Center. And of course, you know better than me the multiple other heavy industry and petrochemicals that are polluting the area, adding to those health risks. At the proposed site of the old Lambton generating station, about the southern half of Sarnia is within that 20-kilometer radius. And we need to remember that renewable energy, wind, solar, hydro, they do not carry these health risks posed by gas. So what difference can you make at the local level? And I love this quote from Dr. Jane Goodall to say, you know, we all make an impact around the world every day or on the world around us. So everything we do makes a difference. We need to decide what kind of difference we want to make. But very recently, just a couple of months ago, we actually found proof of this. So we now have the first ever report measuring the direct carbon reduction we can achieve through community-based work. And this is profiling Canada and the US, and that these strategies work and they do not cost a lot. The projects profiled in here can eliminate up to 8 million or more metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent by 2030 at a cost of under $1 per metric ton. And what does 8 million metric tons look like? It's the same as taking almost 2.5 million cars off the road or leaving 18 million barrels of oil in the ground where it belongs. So what you can do on this issue, you can write and call your councillors, your mayor, request a meeting to state your opposition, post the issue in your local papers, write letters to the editor, or contact your local journalists, bloggers, anyone who can get the word out widely. And register your name in advance. If you can track the date at your city council meeting where this expansion will be on the agenda, to say no at the meeting as a local resident is a very powerful action. And contact as many friends, families, and neighbors in the area to do the same. So in conclusion, we know better solutions exist. Renewable energy protects human health. It saves money and lives. As the science of air pollution has grown, we're learning that we are more susceptible than we ever realized. So there's really no safe exposure limit. Gas plants are accountable for the entire life cycle of the gas burned, from fracking at source, which has its own risk factors or health risks, and often is in the US, as you heard, to the distribution with massive leaks along pipelines, and finally being burned at destination. But gas plants are also accountable for the carbon pollution they're producing, which is driving climate change and affects everybody. So Sarnia residents are already surrounded by disproportionately high industrial and petrochemical pollution, and this area especially should be urgently phasing out harmful gas-fired electricity rather than expanding in order to replace with renewable energy. And getting off gas yields huge co-benefits for public health, lower cost, more jobs per dollar invested than in fossil fuel infrastructure, and critically necessary environmental protections. So I leave you with the final word from the Canadian Public Health Association that reminds us we're the last generation with the opportunity to make these changes to avoid runaway climate change, which we need to treat like the public health emergency that it is, but that this is our moment of opportunity. So say no to gas expansion, demand better because there are better solutions. It's your tax money, your health, and your future. And I thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Dr. Roy. It's so important that the public become aware of the health risks because for a lot of people, I don't think it's on their radar. So it's important to get this message out so they realize the risks that everyone is facing. Our third speaker tonight is Angela Bischoff. She is the director of Ontario Clean Air Alliance, a small but mighty organization leading the charge for a 100% renewable energy future. Angela has spent over 30 years in the environmental nonprofit sector across 4 Canadian cities. She's also a longtime yoga practitioner and teacher, an avid year-round cyclist, and a devoted caregiver to her aging mother. Over to you, Angela.
Thank you, Allan. And before I share my screen, do you want to spotlight me? Thanks. Before I share my screen, I just wanted to draw everyone's attention. At the bottom of your screen, there's, a Q&A section, there's a chat bar. Feel free to pop comments in the chat bar. But if you have a question, please pop it in the Q&A section. We have people that can be answering the questions now in real time, but also Alessia is monitoring the Q&A section, and she will get your ideas for questions to ask the panelists at the end of the meeting after my presentation. So I will share my screen now, and I hope this works. I have a few different screens to open here. Let's see if this is the one. Yeah. Okay. Let me get rid of that and that. Okay. Thank you. I'd especially like to thank the other panelists and also Climate Action Sarnia-Lambton for co-hosting this important discussion with me tonight. And of course, thank you to everybody who showed up tonight on this beautiful summer evening. The Ontario Clean Air Alliance, we're a small but mighty community organization, or an NGO, non-governmental organization. We were formed in 1997 to call for a complete coal phase out in Ontario. It took 17 years, but we won, including the closure of the Lambton coal plant. We then turned our attention to moving Ontario onto a 100% renewable energy future. Let's look at what Doug Ford's energy plan or electricity plan is. His energy plan is all about nuclear and gas. Ontario is now embarking on the largest nuclear build-out in the world. Dr. Mark Winfield from York University estimates this will cost taxpayers $400 billion. The first of these projects is 4 American GE Hitachi reactors to be built at Darlington, just east of Toronto. They'll be the first of their kind, and they'll require US enriched uranium fuel to fuel them for the entire lifetime. So that means his energy plan is all about nuclear increasing from 48% to 75%, with renewables decreasing down to 25%. Of course, while he's building out all these nuclear projects, he's ramping up polluting gas. And since being elected, the Ford government has quadrupled the use of gas for electricity generation. And it will rise to a quarter of our electricity in just 5 years. And that's what coal was 20 years ago, a quarter of our electricity. We phased that out, and now he's just replacing it with polluting gas. This amidst a global climate crisis where the world's scientists have declared we need to cut fossil fuel emissions in half by 2030. Because of course, besides being a very serious climate emitter, gas combustion causes smog, as Mili explained so clearly. And gas jeopardizes our national security. Already we get 70% of our gas from the US, most of which is extra polluting fracked gas, as Mike said. Why is Doug Ford making us more reliant to the whims of erratic US leaders? So how does Ontario compare with our neighbor to the east, Quebec? Well, Hydro-Quebec is planning to meet 100% of its future electricity needs by investing in energy efficiency, renewables, and storage. Low-cost, clean energy. Why would Doug Ford bet on nuclear and gas? Well, who benefits from Doug Ford's energy plan? It's 5 giant corporations that produce nuclear and gas power. They mine uranium, they run fossil pipelines. Consumers, taxpayers, and the environment lose. Because renewables are a fraction of the cost of Ford's nuclear plus gas option. Nuclear is 8 times more expensive than onshore wind, 5 times more expensive than solar, and 3 times more expensive than offshore wind. So let's look at OPG's gas plant proposed for the Lambton site. It's actually a gas peaker plant. It will sit on the edge of the St. Clair River on the site of the former Lambton coal-fired generating station. And it would be up to 500 megawatts. This is a very big plant, not as big as the other gas plants that are very near it. But it would only operate approximately 3% of the hours of the year. So just on the hottest summer days and the coldest winter nights. And of course, it would jeopardize our national security by increasing our dependence on gas imports from the US. It would increase smog pollution in Lambton County. It would increase Ontario's greenhouse gas emissions that are contributing to our climate crisis. And it would raise our electricity rates. But fortunately, there are many cleaner and lower cost alternatives to these short-lived spikes in electricity demand for that 3% of the hours of the year. Most notably, battery energy storage, paying buildings and industries to shift some of their electricity demand from peak to off-peak, because this plant is to meet just the peak demand periods, and getting homeowners to sign up for the very cost-effective Peak Perks program. And if you're not already signed up, I encourage you to do so. You can look it up, Peak Perks, Ontario's Peak Perks. So instead of building a polluting gas plant, OPG, which is, a publicly owned company, you and I own it, we could instead build a battery energy storage system on the site. We could build a large solar farm. We looked at how large, given that the site is 1,100 acres, we could produce enough electricity to power 21,000 homes with a solar farm there. And there's a proposal to build a Lake St. Clair offshore wind farm. And if we were to connect that to the electricity grid, there would be enough, that proposal would be enough to produce power for 555,000 homes. And really, speed is of the essence, because according to the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, this is a UN body comprised of thousands of climate scientists around the world, they say we need to reduce our global climate emissions in half by 2030. Solar and wind can help, as they take only 1 to 3 years to build out. So if we really believe that the climate is changing and it's being caused by fossil fuels, then we must transition rapidly to a renewable future. And fortunately, the rest of the world gets it. They're going renewable. In fact, last year, 92.5% of all the new power capacity added around the world to grids was renewable, almost all wind and solar, mostly solar. Now, our neighbors to the east and west, Manitoba and Quebec, have the lowest electricity rates in Canada because they're primarily powered with water power. Nova Scotia and Newfoundland and Labrador have huge untapped wind power potential. So if we want to reduce our dependence on dirty imported American gas, we should work with our fellow provinces to create a renewable east-west electricity system that makes the most of our strengths right here in Canada. But what can you or I do? What can one person do? Please speak out. First off, this is just a few ideas I'm going to brainstorm here. Contact the president of OPG. I've left her email address there, Nicole Butcher, and I'll send these out a follow-up email so you don't have to write them down right now. But tell them that, you know, we own the company. We want to cancel this dirty gas proposal, and we want to use that site for battery storage and solar. They are investing in these options in other parts of Ontario. Why not in Sarnia-Lambton? 2, ask Doug Ford to cancel his gas procurements and develop a plan to phase out gas power by 2035. The world is moving off of fossil fuels and onto a renewable future. Doug Ford needs to get with the program and take climate change seriously and move to a renewable future. Also, then send your letters and pen your own special letters to all your local media, to your local city councilors, to your local mayor, to your local First Nations. Organize events and start just making your voice heard. Because the politicians tell us that they don't hear from the public, or that they say they don't hear from the public on energy issues. So let's make them hear us loud and clear. And we've made it really easy with a letter tool, and I will also put it in the chat bar, but I'll also mail it to everybody after this meeting. If you go to that link at the top of the bar, Lambton-gas, there is an easy to modify letter tool where you can pop in your name and address, your postal code. It'll go to your local MPP as well as to the CEO of OPG to say, we want a renewable future. We want battery storage. We want solar. We want wind. We don't want more gas. Please check out our website and reach out to me with any questions or comments. I'll send around links to our reports, etc., for further reference. Thank you for your time today. And here's to a renewable future.
Here, here, Angela. Thank you very much. So now we'll turn it over to Alessia Mole of Environmental Defence. She's monitoring the Q&A, and she'll let us know if there are any questions that our panelists can address.
Yeah, sure. There are a few we can go through. Jack's been doing a great job answering them, but maybe the most relevant right now, this is a little bit more of a statement really, but Angela, you mentioned the Lambton gas plant is labeled as a peaker plant, but we know what the Portland plant was originally a peaker plant and now it's operating up to 21 hours a day. So how do we know that it will stay a peaker plant?
Yes, there are two types of gas plants. They're simple cycle and combined cycle. And the simple cycle plants are the true peaker plants. They can ramp up very, very quickly. And that's why they're good for meeting the spikes in electricity demand. But they're very, very energy inefficient. They only have an efficiency of about 30%. So like about 70% of the gas is wasted. So that means that the peaker plants, like the proposed Lambton plant, have very high operating costs, very high fuel costs. So it could be extremely costly to operate them full time. Whereas the Portland's gas plant on the Toronto waterfront, it's a combined cycle gas plant, and it's much more energy efficient than a simple cycle peaker plant. And so that those type of combined cycle plants are the ones that the independent electricity system operator uses to operate year round.
I just want to add to that, and the combined cycle power plants are more efficient, as Jack is letting us know. At the same time, they're only typically, I believe, between 50 and 60% efficiency as well. So not ideal either, but certainly more efficient than the 30% simple cycle power plants.
Another question was, how can we approach lobbying the Ford government on climate issues, particularly renewable energy? It's a tough one.
Sorry,
think-
let's say the
Yeah.
question is how would we approach the Ford government on renewables? Was that the question?
Yeah, pretty much.
Go ahead, Mike, you were going to jump in.
Yeah, unfortunately, there isn't an acknowledgement by the Ford government about climate change. We haven't seen a climate plan put forward by the province at this point in time, and it's been 7 years since the last one was released. So, unless you have a government that acknowledges the challenges before us and produces plans to address those challenges, I would suggest work with the opposition. So let's work with the NDP, with the Liberals and the Greens to highlight not only the environmental impacts of these projects, but also the health impacts for communities, as well as the cost to the taxpayer.
If anyone else, no one else has anything to add. Also a bit relevant to the previous question of whether anyone has found any good strategies or messages speaking to people who are maybe skeptical of renewables, how we can make them come around.
Well, I think a key message is that renewables are wind and solar are now our lowest cost sources of new supply. I mean, 10 or 20 years ago, that wasn't true. But now renewables are the lowest cost source of new supply, much, much lower cost than new nuclear reactors. And most people want to have lower electricity bills. So it's really important to bring those facts to people's attention. And I think most people, when they hear that wind and solar are the lowest cost option, will support them.
And I'd just like to add that that one slide that I showed, that 92.5% of all new supply that came onto the grid last year around the world came from renewables. So when people say, oh, wind and solar are unreliable, only, nobody's investing in them or something, the whole world is investing in them. That is the future that of, resilient and efficient electricity. And the world is proving Ontario wrong.
That, and I'd also like to highlight that battery storage is a game changer. Opponents of renewables or folks that were skeptical about renewables in the past have highlighted the intermittency challenge of renewables. That's no longer the case, or at least it's less of a concern. So I would highlight that aspect in that development. And yeah, so that's that battery storage is a game changer.
Sure, and I would just add, of course, the striking difference in terms of the health aspects, and using health, which is becoming sort of an increasingly important way of advocating, tries to depoliticize the issue, that there's simply no comparison in terms of the health risks of gas versus the absence of those risks with renewable green energy. And of course, the other thing is, is models in other jurisdictions, pointing to countries like Germany, where the national energy mix or the energy grid is, has a substantial amount of renewable without suffering the brownouts that are often used as, as sort of fear mongering that this is real and it's already being achieved elsewhere. And certainly in China, we're seeing a huge uptake. So.
The other aspect I would point out too is the unfairness and the inequity of these power plants, these gas-fired power plants being proposed for areas of the province that one could argue are disadvantaged in terms of in close proximity to significant First Nations communities, in terms of communities that have been traditionally marginalized, and so on. So I don't think it's a coincidence that developers are flocking to St. Clair Township and Lambton County or to Thunder Bay. I think we need to also remind folks about the inequity of these decisions in terms of the power brokers that are currently making those decisions in our boardrooms.
Yeah, one point in terms of Sarnia-Lambton, where we have a lot of oil refineries and chemical industry, you know, people say to me all the time, well, you know, these create good paying jobs, and they do, very well paying jobs. I think we need to really find a way to promote how renewable energy will create good, well-paying jobs too. And I don't see a lot of, you know, coverage on that aspect. And I think it is a very important one. Does anyone have a comment on that?
Yeah, I actually had to take that slide out of my talk to bring it down to 9 minutes. But, you know, I had the fact that there are studies that show, I kind of alluded to it briefly, that if you take $1 and invest it in the fossil fuel sector versus $1 in sort of clean renewable energy sector, you generate something like 3 times the jobs in the clean energy sector. So we have those studies to back that up.
Yeah, thanks, Mili. I think it's important that you know, we find ways to get this message out to the public, because that information, I think, is not widely known or understood. And as far as I know, you know, there are many, many more jobs in renewable energy than there is in fossil fuel. The fossil fuel industries are cutting jobs all the time. We have lost a lot of jobs in Sarnia-Lambton. So, you know, this is an opportunity for people to realize that there's an alternative that's not only going to produce good paying jobs, but it's also going to keep our electricity bills lower, and it's going to keep us healthier.
So I think that's pretty much all the questions that were proposed in the Q&A. And there's not much else in the chat. Maybe Angela, I don't know if you wanted to speak more on the ability of renewables to meet the growing demand with EVs and AI on the rise. And
Well, thanks, Alessia. Maybe I could just invite all 3 presenters if they have any final comments. Did you want to start, Angela?
I would like to hand over my mic to Jack to answer that question from Alessia about EVs and increased demand.
Well, sure. Thank you. Yes, we've got a huge untapped renewable energy potential in Ontario. For example, wind turbines in our Great Lakes could produce more than 100% of our electricity needs. And we've got a huge potential in terms of rooftop and parking lot solar. We did a study for the City of Toronto that showed just in this rooftop and parking lot solar in the City of Toronto could produce 50 to 80% of the city's total electricity needs. So there's this huge untapped solar and wind power potential in Ontario that can meet all of our future needs at a much lower cost than new gas-fired peaker plants and at a much lower cost than new nuclear plants. And in addition, we should be expanding our east-west Canadian electricity grid so we can also import low-cost water, wind, and solar power from Manitoba, Quebec, and the Maritimes. You may have seen reports in the newspaper recently about Nova Scotia's huge offshore wind potential. And that's one of the good projects that Prime Minister Carney seems to be willing to fast track. So we do this huge wind power potential. We're very lucky, a huge wind and solar potential. So it's a huge potential, and it's also low cost. So we can simultaneously move to a renewable electricity future and lower our electricity bills by avoiding the need for the much higher cost options that Doug Ford likes, peaker gas plants and new nuclear reactors from the United States.
Yeah,
I
thanks,
guess
Jack.
that's as a closing remark, I'll take it back now that you're asking for closing remarks now, right, Ellen?
That's correct.
I was just going to add, you know, we have to make our voices heard, and I mentioned it in my presentation, but every one of us needs to speak out. We have leaflets that we distribute. I can mail these to you. Oops. Oh, sorry, it doesn't work. There it is. And they're all about Doug Ford's gas plans, and they open up there's good information in there. I'm happy to mail you those. You can help distribute them in your local neighborhood to mailboxes or to coffee shops. But the whole idea is we have to talk about these things. They're important. They mean a lot to us. This is our responsibility for this generation to move to renewables instead of nuclear and gas. So thank you for all your contributions, everybody.
Thanks, Angela. Mili and Mike, do you have any closing comments? Mili?
Mine is maybe just a very general comment to say that, our problem is not that we lack solutions. Our problem is that we're being kept from the solutions. And I think that, communication, and again, that's really the key. Fighting disinformation has become a real key. We struggle to get information out there, and probably at several times the rate that, that we're able to reach people. People are being reached by disinformation. So I think that communicating on a widespread basis, and, teaching people how to differentiate true vetted information from disinformation has to be part of, increasingly become part of our advocacy as well.
Absolutely. Thanks, Mili. Mike, any comments?
Yeah, no, I'd echo that as well in terms of the challenges are disinformation. And I also, there's an open kind of comment question from Sylvia, which I'd like to highlight. Sylvia is saying, obviously Doug Ford's going in the Ford government's going in a different direction. And as the environmental movement, we're not able to compete with these mega corporations that lobby daily and promote misinformation or have their own agenda. Right now there's the gas plants that we're fighting, but at the same time, the province has a consultation right now to restart the natural gas expansion program, phase 3. And Enbridge staff are out there, getting municipalities to put a good word in for a phase 3 of that program. When that program was started in 2019, we didn't quite understand the environmental implications of natural gas. The world's come a long way in terms of understanding, but also technology. Heat pumps are a game changer, and yet these companies are well organized, and they purport to speak for Ontario's municipalities and Ontario's ratepayers. And we need to basically work together to compete with that, that reality. I agree with Sylvia that individual action doesn't have the leverage anymore. But we are working together, and this webinar is a good example of that. Environmental Defense has collaborated with the Clean Air Alliance and CAPE and Allan's group and so on. So there is a lot of working together behind the scenes. But you're right, we need to mobilize together and build momentum so that we can make change here.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. One thing Climate Action is doing, it's important to engage people in understanding the issues. Catherine Hayhoe, who's a well-known climate scientist, says the most important thing we can do in terms of climate change is to talk about it. And one thing we're going to be starting next month in Sarnia is we're going to have our first climate cafe at a coffee shop or business. We're inviting the public to come and just talk about the issues, answer their questions, address any concerns, an opportunity just to talk about it, because that is the most important thing. And then following talking about it, we can promote advocacy and contacting our politicians and all the rest of the important things that need to be done. And I know Angela is hoping perhaps to come to Sarnia next month. Is that right, Angela? She is. Do you want to say a word about that? Sorry to put you on the spot.
Well, we would love to host an in-person event in Sarnia with you folks, Allan, and maybe engage with the local First Nations communities and have a community conversation about it. But we're open, and anybody in the area, please get in touch with either myself or Allan, and we'll organize something together. And we'll invite CAPE and Environmental Defense, and let's just keep the conversation going. That's the invitation we're putting out. I will follow up with this webinar with an email that goes to everybody. I'll include all the group's slides and their information and a link to the recording and links, hyperlinks to action tools and letters. So you'll hear from us all, okay?
Wonderful. Okay, thanks, Angela. So I just want to conclude then by thanking our speakers, Angela, Mili, and Mike, for their presentations tonight, and thank Alessia for the Q&A, and also Jack, of course, and Aisling, who's behind the scenes. Thanks for making this happen. And thanks to everyone who attended the webinar. I hope you found it worthwhile, and keep up the good work. I think that wraps it up for tonight. Take care, be well,